Okay, so there's many different types of rocks, right? There are some that may be familiar to us, and others not so familiar. Which begs the question, why are there different types of rocks? Well, it has to do with the processes of how they are formed. And there's three main processes. There's melting and cooling, weather and erosion, and there's also heat and pressure. The first process, melting and cooling, involves the melting of rock deep in the ground. Eventually it cools and becomes igneous rock, like this feldspar. Another process is weather and erosion. Weather and erosion breaks down rock into sand and gravel that we call sediment. It eventually hardens through a process called compacting and cementation and it forms sedimentary rock, just like this sandstone. The final process is heat and pressure. Rock deep in the ground becomes soft and is eventually squeezed to form metamorphic rock, like this rock, called gneiss. These processes cause rocks to change. Igneous can turn to metamorphic, metamorphic to sedimentary, sedimentary to igneous, or igneous to sedimentary, sedimentary to metamorphic, metamorphic to igneous, and these rocks can even change back to themselves as well. So this can bring us to the conclusion that all rocks can form into any other type of rock. Whoa! And these processes, with the help of lots of time and these different patterns, form the famous rock cycle.
The water cycle. So simple, even small children understand the basics. Yet so complex, the most advanced earth scientists, hydrologists, geologists, and biogeochemists are studying every part and process. How to summarize what is known about the water cycle? With two words, flows and stores. The water cycle is a series of flows of water between various water stores or storages. There's a lot of water in the ocean, 70% of all the water on Earth. In the ice sheets and glaciers, 2/3 of all the fresh water on Earth. In the snowpacks atop mountains like the Sierra Nevada. In the Great Lakes. In rivers and streams. In reservoirs and watersheds. In wetlands. In the soil. In and on plants and trees rooted in the soil. And beneath all the soil. All this storage is temporary. Water in all its forms is always in flux and always moving. And there is a name for every kind of movement in the water cycle, starting with precipitation. Rain is falling water in liquid form. Snow, ice, hail, and sleet are falling water in solid or frozen form. Fog and mist, falling water in gas or vapor form. Precipitation that falls directly onto the oceans becomes part of surface ocean and can be churned by wave and wind action into ocean currents. Rain and snow that falls directly on rivers and streams becomes one part of stream flow. Rain that falls onto land takes a different path to the river, as does the snow and ice that falls and collects on mountaintops when temperatures warm.
When snow melts, some of it runs through the snowpack and goes into small streams, tributaries that feed into large rivers.
What about that precipitation that falls on and over land? Some is intercepted by vegetation, plants, and trees.
Like you might imagine someone in the game of football intercepting a pass. These are raindrops trying to come to the ground, and the leaves on the tree intercept them before they hit the ground.
And the precipitation that does hit the ground, it can run off if the ground is hardscaped, covered with asphalt or concrete, or if the soil is too wet or saturated to absorb more water, like an over-soaked sponge. Otherwise, precipitation infiltrates the soil surface, percolates into the ground.
Think of it as the water percolating through your coffee grounds in the morning. Gravity continues to pull it downward so it will move through.
Through the topsoil, into spaces between soil and rock particles, down to bedrock and further into fractures, into deep underground aquifers. Even groundwater here is moving sideways or laterally, discharging toward a river, lake, or the sea. Generally, the deeper the flow, the slower the flow. And how does water get back out into the atmosphere? It evaporates, is turned from a liquid into a gas or vapor by the heat of the sun. Water evaporates from every wet surface, even from wet air. Some rain and snow evaporates into the air while falling. Water evaporates through our respiration and perspiration, and from plants through transpiration. Trans means through or across. Plant roots draw up groundwater.
And plants pull that water up through their stems into their leaves and then release it back out through evapotranspiration.
Evapotranspiration, a spelling bee-worthy term for evaporation from soil and water surfaces plus transpiration from plants. Evaporated water molecules are tiny enough to flow into the air, mix with smoke and dirt particles in the atmosphere, cool, condense into visible masses of water vapor, clouds. Winds move clouds into colder air, water droplets collide and merge, grow bigger and heavier until they are so heavy they fall again, as rain or snow, sleet
The
or
Earth
hail.
is continuously bombarded with energy from the sun and radiates most of that energy as heat back into space, making Earth's biosphere an open system in terms of energy. In contrast, the Earth's biosphere is primarily a closed system in terms of water, minerals, and nutrients. There are finite amounts of these substances which are recycled through the living and geological components of the biosphere called a biogeochemical cycle. Carbon, a key element of organic life on Earth, cycles through the biosphere in this way. A tree, like all plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, is an autotroph, an organism that produces its own food from inorganic molecules to facilitate growth. Through photosynthesis, photosynthetic autotrophs use energy from the sun to combine carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water from the soil to form carbohydrates such as glucose. Oxygen is released as a byproduct of photosynthesis. This is where we will start to track the passage of carbon through the carbon cycle. When sunlight strikes a leaf, the energy in the sunlight is captured and used to convert 6 molecules of carbon dioxide gas from the atmosphere into the 6-carbon sugar, glucose, which can be used as a source of energy for cellular reactions. Glucose can then be stored as starch to be used later for energy, or used to make other molecules, such as cellulose, that form the cell wall of plant cells and contribute to the biomass of the plant. Cellulose is one of the substances aiding in the rigid nature of many plant structures, like the leaves, branches, stems, and trunk. When a log or other portion of a tree is burned, the stored glucose is converted by oxidation back to carbon dioxide gas, which is released into the atmosphere. In a similar way, the burning of fossil fuels, which contain carbon that was sequestered in prehistoric decomposing plant and animal tissues and buried for millions of years, releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Animals are not autotrophs, but heterotrophs. Because heterotrophs depend on the carbon cycle to obtain energy and molecules necessary for growth, they need to consume other organisms. They do this by eating plants, or by eating other animals that eat plants. The glucose a deer acquires from eating plants contains carbon that the plant converted from carbon dioxide gas during photosynthesis. The process of converting glucose to energy, a process called oxidative respiration, uses oxygen to break down glucose molecules in cells, ultimately producing ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the energy of most cellular reactions. Carbon dioxide, generated as a waste product of the metabolic oxidation of glucose, is released into the atmosphere. Through the same process of oxidative respiration, plants also release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This occurs predominantly at night when they are not using carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. In addition to emitting carbon dioxide through oxidative respiration, animals release some carbon as solid waste. These solid waste products are broken down in the soil by decomposers, saprobes, and detritivores, organisms such as bacteria and fungi that degrade the waste to remove recyclable nutrients that they use for energy and growth. In the process of breaking down animal feces, decaying plants, and dead animals, decomposers also release carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere. Carbon cycles in a similar way through aquatic ecosystems. Carbon is present in water as dissolved carbon dioxide and bicarbonate ions. Both are sources of carbon for photosynthesis and are taken up by algae and aquatic plants. Carbon dioxide is released into the water through oxidative respiration in these organisms and in other aquatic organisms such as fish, and in decomposition. Carbon dioxide is also exchanged between the water and the atmosphere. The constant absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by photosynthetic organisms and its conversion to carbohydrates by photosynthesis is key to sequestering carbon in the biotic environment. The breakdown of glucose by respiration or burning converts the carbon back to carbon dioxide, releasing it back into the atmosphere. These two processes contribute to the carbon cycle. Because there is a finite amount of carbon in the Earth's biosphere, nutrient cycling such as this is essential to life on Earth. When viewed as a biogeochemical cycle, one can see how the carbon cycle is a balance of carbon stores in the atmosphere, in the bodies of living organisms, and buried in the ground as fossil fuels. Maintaining this cycle in the closed system of the Earth's biosphere allows organisms to live on Earth and participate as key players in the carbon cycle.
Hydrogen sulfide gas is released into the atmosphere by volcanic eruptions, hot springs, and anaerobic decay of sulfur-containing biological material in swamps, bogs, and tidal flats. Certain marine algae produce dimethyl sulfide, a volatile compound that enters the atmosphere as tiny droplets. Sulfur dioxide gas is released into the atmosphere by volcanoes and also forms when dimethyl sulfide reacts with oxygen gas. The burning of fossil fuels, such as coal and oil, releases sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with atmospheric oxygen to produce sulfur trioxide. Some sulfur trioxide reacts with tiny water droplets to form sulfuric acid. Sulfur oxides also react with ammonia to produce tiny particles of ammonium salts. The winds carry droplets of sulfuric acid and particles to sulfate salts, which then fall to the earth in acid deposition. By adding sulfur compounds to the air, the use of fossil fuels increases the rate of acid deposition. All living things require sulfur to make proteins. Plants get sulfur by taking up ions of sulfate salts from the soil. Animals get sulfur by eating plants, and all living things release sulfur compounds when they decay. Decomposition releases sulfate salts, which can be taken up by plants, as well as gaseous hydrogen sulfide. Some hydrogen sulfide enters the atmosphere, but when decay occurs in an oxygen-free environment, anaerobic bacteria break down hydrogen sulfide and release sulfur gas. Oxygen-requiring bacteria can incorporate sulfur into sulfate salts, which can be taken up by plants and enter the food chain once again.